As the sun began to dip behind the towering buildings of Brooklyn, a cool evening breeze swept through the streets, bringing with it a sense of calm. But little did anyone know, a storm was brewing. Jordan Tyson, the 12-year-old son of the legendary boxing champion Mike Tyson, walked home after a thrilling game of basketball, his basketball in hand and a determined look on his face. But that peace was shattered when a racist cop, Officer Briggs, pulled up beside him. Without warning, the officer hurled accusations, calling Jordan a thief and demanding answers. Confused and frightened, Jordan tried to brush it off and walk away. But the officer wasn't done. With a brutal, unprovoked punch, Briggs knocked Jordan to the ground. The crowd froze in shock, unsure of what to do until the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. And then, he appeared. Mike Tyson, the boxing legend, the father, stormed into the scene. The sight of his injured son was all it took to unleash Tyson's unstoppable fury. In the blink of an eye, the world-renowned fighter launched himself at Officer Briggs, delivering devastating blows that left the cop begging for mercy. What happens next? How does justice unfold? Make sure to like and subscribe to Journey of Stories to witness how this powerful story unfolds. A cool breeze swept through the bustling streets of Brooklyn, gently caressing everything in its path. Pedestrians and their furry companions strolled along the sidewalks, the rhythmic clacking of dog paws blending with the hum of casual conversation and the tinkling sound of shopping carts as locals stocked up for the evening ahead. Among the crowd, a familiar figure moved with purpose, Jordan Tyson, the 12-year-old son of the legendary Mike Tyson. A boy forged from the same grit and resilience as his famous father, his head held high as he dribbled his basketball home after an afternoon spent on the court with friends. With his friends behind him, Jordan's steps were steady and his focus unwavering as he neared the street. Just as he was about to cross, a police cruiser pulled up beside him. The heavy doors swung open, and out stepped Officer Briggs, an imposing figure with a thick mustache that seemed to mirror his cold demeanor. To the locals, Briggs was a familiar face, but one no one welcomed. He prowled the neighborhood like a predator, his badge a tool for harassment, his scowl a weapon that struck fear deep into the hearts of the innocent. His voice cut through the air like a whip crack in the night, harsh and unyielding, his tone dripping with authority. Harsh and abrasive, the words sliced through the peaceful hum of the street. Jordan felt a chill of apprehension race down his spine, freezing him in his tracks. His fingers instinctively tightened around the basketball, clutching it like a lifeline, his gaze locked on the menacing figure of Officer Briggs. "Hey, kid!" Briggs barked again, his voice echoing off the buildings with a demanding cadence that brooked no argument. "What are you doing out here?" Jordan's response was hesitant, the words struggling to form on his tongue as a lump of anxiety lodged itself in his throat. "Just heading home, sir," Jordan managed to say, his voice trembling with the fear that had been instilled in him by Briggs's very presence. But Briggs, fueled by years of prejudice and arrogance, scoffed at Jordan's response. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Sure you are," he sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. Without warning, he reached out, grabbing Jordan's arm with a force that would leave bruises for days to come. "Where'd you steal that ball from?" Jordan's heart raced, pounding like a thoroughbred at the starting gate. His chest heaved as he fought to maintain his composure, standing frozen in the face of Briggs's suffocating presence. "It's mine, sir," Jordan stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of fear. His eyes desperately searched Officer Briggs's face, hoping for even the slightest hint of mercy. "My dad got it for me." Briggs's smirk spread across his face, a twisted grin that radiated cruelty and scorn. He eyed Jordan with smug satisfaction, savoring the power he held over the young boy. "Oh yeah," he sneered, his words laced with venomous derision. "And who's your dad? Some deadbeat?" The insult hit Jordan like a physical blow, a personal affront to his family that stung deeper than any punch. It was as if 1,000 needles pierced his pride all at once. The insult cut through him like 1,000 needles. But Jordan's sense of pride and loyalty to his father began to rise, like a phoenix emerging from the ashes of his fear. His jaw clenched, teeth grinding together as he fought to suppress the rage threatening to erupt from within him. He knew better than to talk back. The lessons his father had instilled in him, a man shaped by a lifetime of experience and hardship, echoed in his mind like a constant refrain. Never argue with cops, just comply and get home safe. But the silence, meant to diffuse the situation, only seemed to fuel Briggs' hostility, escalating the tension even further. The silence seemed to intensify Briggs' hostility, the officer misinterpreting Jordan's compliance as a sign of weakness, an open invitation to continue his oppressive tactics. Fueled by a twisted sense of amusement, Briggs yanked the basketball from Jordan's hands. The ball disappeared from his grip as if by cruel magic. Without a moment's hesitation, Briggs tossed the ball into the street, watching as it tumbled across the pavement, rolling aimlessly. Its sudden abandonment was a cruel metaphor for the injustice that had just been thrust upon Jordan. "Run and get it," Briggs commanded, his voice dripping with contempt. "Run and get it," Briggs commanded, his voice dripping with contempt, a mocking gesture that blatantly challenged Jordan's pride and sense of self-worth. Jordan, torn between defiance and fear, stood frozen in place. His heart raced like a galloping horse, but his feet were rooted to the sidewalk, as if an unseen force weighed him down, preventing him from moving. It was in that fleeting moment, one that seemed to stretch into eternity, that fate intervened. The universe seemed to conspire, setting in motion a chain of events that would change the course of Jordan's life forever. The night air was thick with tension, the street filled with the sounds of gasps and murmurs, as if the very ground beneath them was aware of the storm that was about to unfold. Horrified gasps filled the air as Briggs's fist connected with Jordan's face. The force of the punch sent the boy reeling, stunned and disoriented, before he collapsed to the ground. The sickening thud of his fall seemed to reverberate through the very heart of the street, the sound a deafening roar that echoed in the minds of the shocked onlookers. A woman let out a heart-wrenching shriek, her cry a raw, primal expression of the outrage and disbelief that gripped the small crowd. Jordan, dazed, gently touched the tender, throbbing skin of his face, his fingers trembling with the sting of the blow. He clenched his teeth, struggling to fight back the tears that threatened to break free, his mind racing with a mixture of pain and anger. His father's words rang in his ears, a mantra that had been ingrained into his soul. Be strong. Be strong for yourself. Be strong for your family. But as he lay there, the concrete cold and unforgiving beneath him, Jordan felt his resolve begin to waver. The weight of the pain, both physical and emotional, pressed down on him, threatening to swallow him whole. Just as Jordan began to sink into despair, a glimmer of hope appeared, a beacon of light in the darkness that sought to consume him. From the depths of the street, a silhouette emerged, a figure that seemed to radiate with the strength and power of a titan. In that moment, Jordan's heart surged, his body instinctively drawing strength from the sight of the man who had always been his hero. A flicker of recognition surged within Jordan, a spark of hope and salvation that fought against the despair clawing at his soul. Tyson, a powerful presence that seemed to command respect even from the shadows, had been caught unaware by the incident unfolding before him. As he emerged from the convenience store, his eyes fell upon Jordan, a vulnerable figure sprawled on the ground, his face marred by the marks of Briggs's brutality. For a moment, Tyson seemed frozen in place, his expression inscrutable, as if the weight of what he was witnessing had temporarily stunned him. But as the reality of the situation sank in, something deep within him stirred. His gaze hardened, his jaw tightened, and a burning fury began to build inside him. As the situation sank in, Tyson's gaze hardened, his jaw tightening with a rage so intense it seemed capable of shattering mountains. His eyes narrowed, honing in on the figure of Officer Briggs, a stain of corruption standing over his son, a twisted mockery of justice. The world around them seemed to pause. The air thickened with the weight of impending violence, the tension palpable as if the very pavement beneath their feet could feel the storm about to break. A silent showdown unfolded, the calm before the storm. Tyson's shoulders tensed with seething anger as he drew closer, each step fueled by a primal determination to protect what was his. Tyson's eyes gleamed with the wrath of a god as he stared at the officer, his fury radiating in waves. In that instant, his identity transcended the limits of his legendary boxing career. His status as a former world champion seemed to fall away, shedding like old skin. What remained was not just the champion, but a father, a protector, a primal force of nature forged in the fires of love and devotion. The fury that blossomed within him burned like wildfire through his veins, a power unlike anything he had felt in the ring. But now, it wasn't fueled by the rage of competition. It was fueled by something much fiercer, the unyielding, all-consuming love for his son. Mike Tyson, his grocery bag still in hand, moved forward with a fierce determination that sent tremors through the crowd. Instinctive fear caused them to part, as if they were mere flotsam in the wake of his presence. "Hey!" Tyson's voice erupted like a thunderous boom, reverberating off the buildings and commanding the attention of everyone on the street. The whispers and murmurs that had spread through the spectators came to an abrupt halt, the air thick with anticipation. Briggs, momentarily distracted by the interruption, was about to unleash another stream of derision when he froze, his confidence faltering in the face of Tyson's presence. When Briggs's eyes fell upon the figure approaching him, time seemed to slow. That brief second of recognition stretched into what felt like an eternity. His arrogant expression faltered, the smug confidence he once wore so comfortably beginning to crack under the intense, unyielding gaze of Mike Tyson. Like a predator suddenly aware of a far more powerful foe, Briggs froze. His arrogance dissolved, replaced by a flicker of fear that spread through him, his confidence trembling like a candle flame fighting against the wind. Yet, despite the unease coursing through him, Briggs managed to recover. His sneer returned, contorting into a mask of false bravado. "What's your problem, pal?" he spat, attempting to regain control of the situation. His words dripped with sarcasm, thinly veiling the apprehension that gnawed at him. "This doesn't concern you." Briggs straightened, hands resting on his hips, attempting to stand tall, a defiant posture meant to challenge Tyson's authority. But Tyson, undeterred, shifted his focus to his son. His fierce eyes softened with a deep, unwavering concern as he placed a gentle hand on Jordan's shoulder. "You okay, champ?" he asked, his voice a balm, soothing the wounds that had been inflicted upon his son. The affectionate nickname, Champ, was more than just words. It was a term of endearment that spoke volumes about Tyson's pride and love for the boy. The warmth in Tyson's voice seemed to banish some of the fear from Jordan's expression, though the pain and shock of the night still lingered in his eyes. Jordan's face, hardened by the desire to emulate his father's strength, nodded in response. But the pain was unmistakable, etched deep into his features like an indelible scar. Tyson, attuned to the smallest of nuances in his son's expression, immediately recognized the depth of the wound that had been inflicted. His face hardened, a visage of steady determination settling over him. A single glance was all it took for Tyson to understand the gravity of the situation. As the gravity of the situation hit him, Tyson's paternal instincts flared to life. His body tensed with an intensity that seemed capable of bending steel. With a calm, calculated motion, he set down the grocery bag, its contents forgotten, and turned his full attention to the culprit. In a blur of motion that defied the laws of physics, Tyson unleashed a devastating right hook. His fist came crashing forward like a battering ram of fury and retribution. Briggs' eyes widened in shock, but he barely registered the movement before it connected with his face. The force of the punch hit with the impact of a speeding truck, sending him crashing backward. The punch hit with the force of a speeding truck, sending Briggs hurtling backward into the side of his cruiser. The crowd, initially frozen in shock, was now overtaken by a surge of exhilaration that bordered on frenzy. They erupted into a cacophony of cheers, their voices rising in a chorus of vindication and righteous vengeance. The sound was a collective roar of approval and applause, a cathartic release that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them, an eruption of long-suppressed anger and frustration at the injustice that had plagued their neighborhood for far too long. And in the midst of it all, Tyson stood tall, his powerful figure silhouetted against the night sky. His presence was an unwavering symbol of strength, justice, and a father's love. Tyson's eyes were fixed on Briggs with the predatory gaze of a lion surveying its prey. Briggs, dazed and bloodied, crawled across the pavement, his movements slow and uncoordinated, like a wounded animal struggling to stay alive. Every inch he dragged himself forward was a reminder of the brutality he had just endured. You just assaulted an officer," Briggs stammered, his words slurred by the crushing force of Tyson's punch. His pride refused to accept the harsh reality of his defeat, but it was clear from the tremble in his voice and the fear creeping into his expression that he knew he had lost. As if to defy the odds, Briggs reached for his baton, his fingers fumbling desperately with the clip that held it in place. His movements were sluggish, his hands shaking with a mix of pain and adrenaline as he struggled to regain control. But it was no use. He was nothing more than a cornered animal now, grasping at straws in a futile attempt to salvage what little dignity he had left. Briggs struggled to regain his footing, the desperation of a drowning man grasping at straws, only to sink deeper into the abyss. His attempt to regain control was futile, his movements nothing more than the frantic flailing of a cornered animal. Each second seemed to slip away, his strength fading as Tyson's presence loomed over him. Tyson, his strength and dexterity honed through years of training, moved with the fluid grace of a predator closing in on its prey. With a swift, calculated motion, his hand snatched Briggs's wrist, constricting it like a python tightening its hold. The baton slipped from Briggs' hand, clattering to the pavement with a harsh metallic sound, its purpose rendered utterly useless in the face of Tyson's superior skill and dominance. The pavement was cold and unforgiving, offering no solace to Briggs, whose vision blurred and swam as he struggled to process the events that had just unfolded. His mind was clouded with pain and adrenaline, scrambling for a way out, any escape from the overwhelming force that had just shattered him. His eyes darted around the street, searching for salvation, but it never came. In that moment, as his gaze swept over the scene, Briggs realized with a sinking feeling that he was utterly alone. The other officers, witnesses to his brutality, had stood aside, their silence a condemnation of his actions. Their inaction left him stranded, abandoned by those who once stood beside him. Broken and defeated, Briggs turned his gaze back to Tyson, his pride crushed under the weight of the reality before him. He was no longer the hunter, but the hunted. Briggs' plea for mercy was raw and desperate, his voice trembling as the tables turned. The hunter, now the hunted. "Please," he stuttered, his words thick with desperation and fear. His chest heaved as he struggled to draw breath, each inhale shaky and shallow. "Please don't hurt me." The once proud officer, so accustomed to wielding power over others, was now a pitiful shadow of his former self. His defiance had been supplanted by a cowardice that seemed to seep from his pores, his arrogance crumbling under the weight of Tyson's unyielding justice. Tyson, his imposing figure casting a dark shadow over Briggs' prone body, knelt down beside the fallen officer. His hand gripped Briggs' collar, lifting him up with ease, as if he were nothing more than a rag doll. Tyson's hand gripped the collar of Briggs's uniform shirt, lifting him effortlessly as if the officer were nothing more than a ragged doll. In that moment, Tyson's voice was calm and even, yet it seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 worlds, each word a promise laced with the certainty of fate. "You ever touch my son again?" Tyson growled, his eyes like coals burning with unrelenting fury. "I swear, you won't be getting back up next time." Briggs's body trembled like a leaf caught in a gale, his face pale with fear. His head nodded in defeated acquiescence, the fear gripping his heart so tightly it threatened to consume him. His pride, his arrogance, those very things that had led him to this moment, crumbled beneath the suffocating weight of Tyson's fury. The moment had crumbled beneath the weight of Tyson's fury, Briggs's resistance and illusion shattered by the truth of his defeat. As Tyson, seemingly satisfied with his work, began to rise from his place beside the fallen officer, the night was pierced by a voice that echoed from a distance, sharp and commanding. "Sir, step away from the officer." Tyson turned his gaze toward the direction of the voice, his eyes narrowing as he found himself confronted with a new threat. A fresh-faced officer. His uniform was crisp, unblemished, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in the street. His hand rested on the holstered weapon at his side, ready to assert his authority. But it was clear from the officer's stance that he was unsure of what to do next. The young officer's hand rested on the butt of his gun, his eyes hard but not without a flicker of empathy. He stood his ground, his presence a stark contrast to the crumpled form of Briggs. "You've seen enough," Tyson growled, his words a clear challenge that seemed to dare the officer to contradict him. As Tyson rose to his full height, his fists clenched in defiance, the air thickened with the intensity of the moment. The crowd, who had gathered in stunned silence, seemed to hold their collective breath, the tension palpable in the night air. Each second stretched longer, filled with anticipation, as if the very streets were waiting for the next move. With a sigh that betrayed the weight of disappointment and frustration he carried, the young officer shifted his gaze to Briggs, who lay motionless on the pavement, a broken shell of the man he once was. The officer sighed, the weight of his duty pressing on him. He shifted his gaze to Briggs, who lay sprawled on the ground, a broken and battered reminder of his own misdeeds. "You messed with the wrong guy today," the officer murmured, his voice a mix of exhaustion and disapproval. His words carried a bitter truth that stung Briggs more sharply than any physical blow, each syllable cutting through his pride like a knife. In that moment, as the harsh reality of his mistake settled deep in his gut, Briggs understood there was no escape, no way to undo the consequences of his actions. The truth weighed heavy on him, sinking into his bones like lead. Briggs, his body aching with every breath, remained on the cold pavement, a helpless, broken figure, completely at the mercy of the situation he had created. The aftermath of his brutality set in like a slow poison, seeping through Briggs' body and soul. His career, once a source of pride and security, now felt like nothing more than ashes scattered in the wind. As Tyson turned his back to Briggs, a deliberate dismissal of the defeated officer, he placed a hand on his son's shoulder. The moment was heavy with meaning, the simple touch speaking volumes. The bond between father and son was a bulwark against the cruelty of the world, an unbreakable force that transcended everything around them. The words Tyson spoke were simple, unadorned, but they landed like a balm on the wound that had been inflicted upon Jordan's soul. They were a reminder of the love and protection that surrounded him, a shield against the darkness that had threatened to consume him. The darkness that had threatened to consume him began to recede, replaced by the warmth of his father's touch. With Tyson's hand on his back, a gentle but firm reassurance, Jordan stood tall. His eyes, still haunted by the events that had transpired, now held a glimmer of newfound strength, burning brightly within his heart. "Let's go home, champ." Jordan's smile broke through the shadows, a beacon of hope in a world that had tried to smother it. It blossomed like a flower unfurling in the morning sun, full of promise and resilience. Father and son, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night, began their journey home. As they walked, a cheer rose up from the assembled crowd, a chorus of vindication and admiration. The sound surged through the streets, a collective release of emotion, their applause a testament to the justice that had been served. The cheer of the crowd rose higher, drowning out the lingering echoes of Briggs's brutality. In that moment, justice had been served. The people of Brooklyn had witnessed a moment of heroism and triumph, one that would be etched into the annals of their neighborhood's history forever. On that night, the legend of Mike Tyson was once again reaffirmed. The champion whose fists had sent countless opponents reeling, whose determination and skill had made him a household name, had proven that his legacy was far more than just a collection of fights and titles. It was a love for his family, a devotion to those he held dear, a devotion that burned brighter than any spotlight. Turning him from a mere man into a hero, a protector, and an inspiration for generations to come. In the wake of the drama that had unfolded before their eyes, the crowd, humbled by the sheer force of Tyson's determination, understood the truth that had been laid bare before them. They realized in that moment that true power was not defined by the force of one's fists, but by the courage to stand up for those who could not stand for themselves. Respect, they learned, could not be demanded or bought. It was earned through actions, integrity, and the willingness to defend the innocent and hold the unjust accountable. In that moment, a truth was laid bare before everyone. The crowd, humbled by Tyson's unyielding determination, understood that true power was not defined by punches, but by the courage to stand up for those who cannot stand for themselves. Tyson, not just a boxing legend, but a symbol of love and responsibility toward his family, left behind a greater lesson. Respect cannot be bought or demanded. It must be earned through actions, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to protect the innocent and hold the unjust accountable. This story, more than just a fight, is about courage, about standing up against injustice, and about how we can all become heroes in the eyes of those around us.